Hello, my name is Andrew. You can call me Cookies, and today we will be going over how to heal all of the encounters within the Eternal Palace on Heroic difficulty. Starting off with Abyssal Commander Savara, we have major mechanics to follow, which are half the raid will gain either a Toxic or Frost debuff, and essentially all you want to do is make sure that you stay away from abilities of the opposite debuff type as well as players of the opposite debuff type. So pretty simple enough. The next thing is I'm going to rewind this a bit and we are going to go over one of the first major mechanics, which is Overflow. So Overflow will target a few random players. You can see here that the Druid gets it, and essentially the player needs to be out of the raid because they're going to drop a puddle on the ground when this is over, and they also need either 1 to 2 other players of their same debuff type to come and stack and soak this damage that's about to happen. You can see that I jump in with the Druid, and me and him will take about half of our health and damage, so that's a good thing to watch out for to heal, for spot healing, and also you could use like externals on people that get overflow and whatnot. Other than that, we have Crushing Reverberation next, which is a big tank hit, and also will hit some of the melee DPS if they're near the tank. The more players that stack up with this, the less damage that it happens to one person, so just make sure that the tank's essentially topped off for this, and if you're doing a strategy where a majority of the raid is stacked up in melee, then you're going to want to also AoE heal those melee up when Crushing Reverberation happens. And then the only other really big major mechanic is Overwhelming Barrage, which happens at 100 boss energy. And you'll see here 94, 96, 98, 100 Overwhelming Barrage. You will see all these spines spawn around the boss, Frost and Toxic. And if a player gets hit by the opposite debuff type, you can see here that some Frost ones are aimed at me that I dodge. The raid will take a decent chunk of raid-wide damage. So you can see here that a couple people get hit and we take a little bit of raid-wide damage. So this is where you'll usually want to utilize healing cooldowns just in case people mess up the mechanic, since there's no real other big raid-wide damage happening. You can see if I actually fast forward this a little bit, I believe it's this Overwhelming Barrage that I get hit, and the raid takes a significant chunk of damage because a majority of the raid got hit by the wrong colors. So you can see there that we dip down pretty low. I pop Spirit Link, and this is why you just use healing cooldowns here just to counter this. Other than that, the boss plays on repeat over and over, and that's pretty much the first fight. So those are the major things to watch out for, and we'll move on to the next boss. So moving on to the Blackwater Behemoth. This encounter is all about killing these pufferfish at the start of the fight. You want to kill one of the 2 pufferfish, and as soon as it dies, you will see this green aura appear. You want to make sure that you stand in it and get the bioluminescence buff, and then you can resume the fight as normal, which this bioluminescence buff essentially allows you to be healed. But while you have this buff active, you have to make sure that you do not stand anywhere where there is no surface underneath your feet. Otherwise, you will insta-die. So be careful of where you stand, especially on the later platforms that you'll see shortly. The next major mechanic in this fight is that if you are within 5 yards of another player, every couple of seconds the boss will shock you and it will chain lightning to those players. So you want to make sure you stay spread out about 5 yards from all other players as much as you possibly can. You can see here that we are killing the next pufferfish, and we use some Spirit Links to top off because our debuff's expired, and we get the new debuff. So the next major mechanic is you have Toxic Spine, which is going to be the first major thing to watch out for as a healer. It will apply this debuff to a majority of the raid, and they will just take light ticking damage over the next 10 seconds. So either track the debuff and keep them topped off, or just be ready to do some decent AoE healing while that debuff is on. And the next and last ability is Shock Pulse, which does a AoE pushback to the entire raid, and as soon as it expires, the whole raid will take a burst of damage depending on how far away they were from the boss. So I guess how close you were to the boss. So the closer you are, the more damage you take. Most of the time you just ignore this so far, and you just pop healing cooldowns to live through it. So Shock Pulse, big healing cooldowns, Toxic Spine, heal players that are affected by the dot. And you can see here this goes into phase 2, where you just have to swim across the waters. Sorry for the poor video quality. You have to swim across the water and get to the other side, where you can see now there are gaps. So you can see right here, I swim over one, there's gaps in between the surface areas. So you have to make sure that when you get pushed back, you aren't getting pushed back into these spaces and staying there for too long. Other than that, the fight just rinse and repeats. You just go from platform to platform and deal with the exact same mechanics. It just gets a little bit more difficult. I would say the second platform is probably the hardest, just because there's a lot of outranging issues and the pushback's a little more nasty. So that's it for the Blackwater Behemoth. So next up we have the Radiance of Ajara, which gets ninja pulled here, but the major mechanics to this fight is that you are going to be dodging these tornadoes that spawn on the floor, and they will go around in circles around the room, and that's primarily the biggest issue you'll be dealing with as far as positioning. So you usually want kind of a light spread, and then just point your camera top down and just keep dodging the tornadoes while dealing with the other mechanics. The first, or I guess the second major healing mechanic would be Arcane Bomb. Players will get debuffed with these Arcane Bombs. They need to move out of the group. I get instantly dispelled there, which is not supposed to happen. But essentially what you want to do is you want to move out to the edges of the room. Like you can see over here, the Druid is over on the edge, out of the group. And then the player gets dispelled. The Arcane Bomb stays on the floor where it is, where it was dispelled, and then it blows up after a short delay. So pretty much count to 3 and then dispel the debuffs once the players are out of the group. Other than that, we have Unshackled Power, which the boss will use on a timer, and you can just track it here through Bigwigs or DBM, and you will see that it does a large amount of raid-wide damage. So you just want to make sure that the raid is topped off before the following Unshackled Power. You can see here that he's about to cast it, just to show how much damage it does. It does do a fair bit of damage to the raid, and then you just want to make sure that the raid is topped off before the next one happens, which you do have a decent amount of time in between. And then other than this, there's just an intermission. You are going to have to run to the ad that spawns. It spawns on the opposite side of the room most of the time. You run through these little orbs which spawn tornadoes, and then you dodge the tornado that spawns, and then you go to the ad. You can see here I get past the tornado, and then here is where a decent amount of AoE damage is going to be happening to the raid because of these spam chain lightning casts that are happening, as well as a big knockback that the ad does. You can see here I position myself so I get knocked back into the wall. Sometimes that wall will not always be there depending on where the ad spawns. But either way, you want to make sure you don't get knocked out of this little safe zone that you're in inside this storm. And then you'll just want to save like a healing cooldown or two to get through this intermission with the AoE damage that is happening from the chain lightnings. And that's pretty much the whole fight. It just repeats. You go through essentially 2 intermissions until you're done. But that's about it for Radiance of Ajara. And that is going to cover it for part 1 of these guides. So part 2 will cover the next 3 bosses. Thank you for watching, and make sure that you come stop by the stream if you'd like to see some Mythic progress over the course of this raid tier. I stream every day of the week except for Sundays, so 6 days a week, starting at 8:15 p.m. PST. So over on twitch.tv/Moarcookiez Live, but all that stuff will be down in the description below. Thanks again. See you in part 2.